That body teleported here from a parallel world!
The base sequence was an exact match with the left half that was found.
There are no signs of him ever having been frozen.
And yet his time of death is 12 o'clock today.
The estimated time of death is approximately 9 hours ago.
I had a dream.
The time limit within Somnium is 6 minutes.
It wasn't a good dream.
Somnium scan! Activate! Solve this. You can do it.
No forgiveness! No mercy! Never!
The mind never lies. But I would be if I said I didn't end up falling in love with Kotaro Uchikoshi's AI The Somnium Files, developed and published by Spike Chunsoft with a release in 2019. So it only makes sense after having replayed the first title, my thoughts on which you can find in my spoiler-free review of it, I would hop straight into its sequel, nirvanA Initiative. Hello everyone, this is nirvanA Novels, and in today's video, let us discuss Kotaro Uchikoshi's AI The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative, which was released in summer 2022.
Okay then, let's begin.
The story of AI The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative takes place in two distinct time periods. The first, which I shall refer to as the present, takes place 6 years after the events of the first game. Following a now-adult Mizuki as she investigates new occurrences in a series of serial killings that started 6 years ago, the game's second main setting. Mizuki is assisted by Date's former AI ball partner, Aiba, and the two of them must investigate the continuation of a bizarre series of killings where each victim was spliced perfectly in half. The second time period, as I mentioned, is set 6 years before this, still sometime after the events of the first game. During this time, which I shall call the past, the game follows Special Abyss agent Kuruto Ryuki and his AI ball partner, Tama, as the two of them investigate the beginning to this bizarre series of murders which will become known as the half-body serial killings. As the story progresses, things only get more bizarre as the timelines of the two protagonists converge while both Mizuki and Ryuki interact with characters old and new to try and get to the bottom of these seemingly impossible murders. The search for truth is a confusing and dangerous one though, one that will have our two protagonists dealing with things such as secret societies believing in the simulation theory who wish to break free from their simulated world, an institution of genetics rumored to be involved in unethical human experimentation, and so many secrets and hidden connections between characters. Much like the first game, nirvanA Initiative blends a unique and compelling murder mystery with fascinating sci-fi concepts to make a story that is mysterious, exciting, and really mind-blowing at times. Kotaro Uchikoshi outdid himself in this entry, because the ambition of telling one murder mystery story set between two different yet connected periods of time made for a story that I did not want to put down while reading. Like last time, any sci-fi or technological aspects necessary to understanding the full extent of the mystery being told will be properly explained ahead of time, so no big reveal or plot twist feels like a cheap sci-fi deus ex machina. I actually think I prefer this game's central mystery over the first one, but I think it's just a matter of personal preference. Looking back on it, the murder mystery story told in the first AI title definitely feels tighter and more logically sound. But this new series of killings and how it makes you question the nature behind everything you're seeing and investigating is just amazing to experience. And I also enjoy the heightened stakes and greater sense of scope I got from nirvanA Initiative's story. But this upping the ante is something that only works so well because of the first entry. The first entry was a compelling and emotional sci-fi murder mystery, but the stakes and scale of the story were pretty low, I mean in the grand scheme of things. But that didn't bother me. I love character-driven stories, and the stakes were high for the characters personally by the end of the story, and that worked exceptionally well for the first entry to this series. What's cool about nirvanA Initiative though, is it manages to keep that character-driven aspect to its story, while also raising the stakes in the story that plays with our preconceived notions of the setting and characters from the first game. I love stories that become grander in scope over time, so seeing nirvanA Initiative successfully manage to expand upon what made the first title so great while also escalating the stakes in a believable and satisfying way was great to see. It makes me wonder where the story can go in a theoretical third entry, which I hope so bad that we get. Let's make this series a trilogy, come on. Or just never stop it. I just need more trippy Somnium stages in my life, please. So how are the main characters this time around? Well, sorry Konami Date, but I gotta say, I love Mizuki and Aiba and Ryuki and Tama as the protagonists even more than I loved you as the protagonist for the first game. You're still great though, just a little too pervy for my tastes. Let's start with talking about Mizuki and Aiba. Much like Date and Aiba from the first entry, these two work wonderfully off each other. What's really cool is Mizuki adopted so much of Date's personality, especially his more comedic side, and that's really cool to see, because it shows how much Date has been an influence in Mizuki's life. But while Mizuki does retain a lot of the same snarky charm as Date from the first game, her motivations and how she goes about investigating throughout her daily life are vastly different to that of Date.
Jin Furue's other half was found. The other side of his corpse. The one we couldn't find 6 years ago. The time of his death was around 12 o'clock today. What do you think that means?
Which makes her a familiar, yet still compelling and interesting new protagonist to follow. And her back and forth with Aiba and the bond they form throughout the story are really great as well. I'd say Aiba is less of an interesting character this time around, but she still does serve an important role to the story. And she's just extremely entertaining to watch, both in the Somnium worlds and in the real world as she interacts with Mizuki, so I'm still extremely happy with their character in this game's story. Last thing I'll say before moving on to Ryuki and Tama is that Mizuki is much less pervy than Date, which was very appreciated by me while going through this game. Overall, I think nirvanA Initiative does a better job at not breaking serious or tense moments with misplaced and pervy humor, which I think is another reason I might personally prefer this game's story to the first. The story does still have those awkward moments where it indulges in this cheap humor when the story really isn't calling for it, and in a weird way, it's almost worse than it was in the first one, because when the game for the most part manages to balance its comedic and serious writing well, it's all the more noticeable when it fumbles that balance, if that makes sense. But still, treating important moments in the story with proper levity is something this game does much better than the first, so I just wanted to point that out. It's good to know that Mizuki didn't adopt all of Date's personality.
Whoa! Porno mag!
Ryuki and Tama also make for a compelling and entertaining pair of characters to follow, just for different reasons than Mizuki and Aiba. In the first game, Aiba was more often than not the straight man to Date's comedic or pervy antics. This wasn't always the case, especially in the Somniums themselves, but overall, I'd say that's how I'd describe the relationship between the two. What's interesting about Ryuki and Tama is that relationship is flipped. Ryuki, for the most part, is a much more serious and focused character than Date was in the first game. I know me comparing these characters to Date a lot may feel like I'm ragging on the guy, but I swear I do still love him as a character so much. Ryuki has an interesting amount of baggage that weighs on his heart and mind throughout the story. Thankfully, it doesn't turn him into a boring and brooding edgelord, but it does make him different, and I like that. With Mizuki, we basically get a younger, female version of Date. So instead of having Ryuki act the same way as Date, which at this point would have made the character type feel repetitive and uninspired, they went a different route. Taking full advantage of the fact that this story has two protagonists is something this game does extremely well, and it creates a more unique and nuanced narrative experience than the first title. All that serious talk about Ryuki aside, he's not all serious though.
Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, I boiled a potato and my socks in a sack.
Mr. Ryuki, are you okay?
And a big part of that is thanks to his AI ball partner, Tama. Whereas Aiba was the straight man to Date, Ryuki is more often than not playing the straight man to Tama.
There are a lot of lanterns lined up here.
Maybe Moma hung them up.
Wait, who's hung?
Huh?
Moma's hung, huh?
That's not what I said.
She's loud, crass, random, and just overall hilarious to watch. Oftentimes, Ryuki will be looking at a situation either seriously or indifferently, and it's Tama who breaks the tension with some misguided or pervy humor. And somehow, the fact that it's the AI partner breaking tension, with the main character desperately trying to stay on track most of the time, it makes that same type of humor that bugged me so much in the first game work better. I don't know why, but it's just a lot more bearable and interesting to see the main character himself try to focus on things while being distracted and berated by his AI partner, rather than it being the main character himself breaking the tension and seemingly not taking things seriously. I don't know why I think this works better, but I do. And I want to give nirvanA Initiative props for making me love so much of the humor in this game. This relationship and dynamic contrasts so interestingly to Mizuki and Aiba's relationship. I had a blast watching these two sets of characters go throughout this story and interact with one another. A couple more things I'll say about the main characters briefly before moving on to the rest of the story aspects. Ryuki is more often than not a serious and focused character, but he still does go wild sometimes.
What's wrong, Ryuki?
It never feels like it's intruding on the story in harmful ways, and seeing how him and Tama bounce off each other when he's like this, especially in the Somnium stages, is extremely entertaining. His relationship with his AI ball partner, Tama, is also very different to that of Mizuki and Aiba's relationship. And I mean more than just the comedic aspects. Ryuki and Tama go through a lot throughout the story, and seeing how they challenge or change one another as characters is extremely interesting and satisfying to see. Much like Aiba in the first game, Ryuki is more of an important character to Tama than Tama is to Ryuki. But they spend the game together, and Tama is extremely fun and compelling in her own right, so I'm still happy with her presence in the story. Mizuki and Aiba also have a really interesting relationship throughout nirvanA Initiative's story, but I do feel like their relationship stays a bit more stagnant than that of Ryuki and Tama, or even Date and Aiba from the first game. But for very different reasons, both Mizuki and Aiba are interesting characters and develop in unique ways throughout the story. How about the rest of the characters? Much like the first game, the wide cast of characters are all really interesting and well written. All the important new characters go through complex and emotional character arcs, and really none of the new cast feels like filler. They all serve a purpose in the overarching story, and it's hard for me to decide if I like them more or less than the cast of characters from the first game. I'd say the sci-fi concepts explored in nirvanA Initiative and how they impact the new characters make me personally enjoy them more than I did the characters in the first game. But in terms of quality, they're probably about equal. But this game also has the returning cast from the first game, and I enjoy their presence in the story, even though they're not important for the most part. What I mean is, the returning characters themselves are important to the characters of Mizuki and Ryuki themselves, but for the most part, they don't actually serve an important purpose in the murder mystery story that's unfolding. Now, I did say for the most part. Some characters, like side characters from the first game who didn't get much attention, become much more relevant in unexpected and fascinating ways. And I do want to give props for that. It's cool seeing the already pretty fleshed out cast of characters from the first game get even more development. But I'd still say for the most part, the returning characters from the first game don't do much aside from activating dopamine in your brain because you recognize them from the first game. I personally enjoyed them, but that's because I'm already attached to these characters, and find it interesting to see how they've grown, changed, or stayed the same since the end of the first game. Which means I personally didn't mind their inclusion in the story, but if I'm being objective, it doesn't serve any purpose. And I can't imagine someone playing just nirvanA Initiative really getting anything out of these characters. Not that I would imagine anyone would start with nirvanA Initiative, this is the second game after all, but this game's story was made with the purpose to be accessible to newcomers, and let me talk about that for a minute. This game has a bizarre desire to avoid any spoilers from the first game, and it's for the reason I just mentioned. This game was meant to be accessible to both fans of the first game and newcomers. But does anyone really want to hop into the second entry of a story-driven game? I don't know, that feels odd to me. And this game goes through some pretty intense hoops to avoid said spoilers from the first game, in ways I kinda don't like. It's made abundantly clear from the start of nirvanA Initiative that this game's new mystery story will not connect to the mystery of the first game. And that's fine and makes perfect sense. That mystery story has been solved and wrapped up, and I wouldn't want to see it dug up in cheap ways to get a reaction out of the players. That being said, the stuff that happened in the first game is still extremely important to the characters, especially the returning ones from the first game. So to have them almost never mention or reference the events of the first game and how it impacted them in meaningful ways, it feels cheap and kinda disrespectful to the characters. You go through this little trivia quiz thing at the beginning, which tests to see if you know the events of the first game, and if you answer right, which I did, you get some lines throughout the game that explicitly reference the events and ending of the first one. But they're so cheap and surface level that it doesn't really feel like it matters. Because again, the events and ending of the first game were so vital to the returning characters in this game that if you wanted to make a truly compelling and believable script that has the characters acknowledge the events of the first game in meaningful ways and show the impact it has on them, you'd need two completely different scripts anytime there's a character from the first game on screen. So instead, your reward for playing the first game is cheap references to it, and that's about it. I don't know why it bugs me so much, and I promise I will shut up about it in a minute. Maybe it's because I love so much of this game's unique story and how it expands on the setting and potential of the first game that it just disappoints me when it drops the ball this hard. The last thing I'll say in regards to this game and how it treats the events of the first, above all else, Date has it the worst. This is a spoiler-free review, and in case you haven't played the first game but are watching this video, go to this timestamp to avoid having the ending of the first game spoiled. So for anyone playing through nirvanA Initiative, you might have noticed something odd about Date, that he still has the appearance of Saito Sejima from the first game. I thought this was a clue that not all was as it seemed with this character and maybe even reality itself. But no, Date is still in his original body, the body of Falco to be precise. He had a silicone face mask made that he actively chooses to wear because Saito Tsujima's face is the one that everyone is familiar with. There's just so much wrong with this, but I'll try to hold back and focus on the biggest thing. You're telling me that Date, after spending the entire previous game essentially being toyed with and tortured by Saito Tsujima, thought it would be a good idea to wear his face around as his normal face, because it's the one people associate him with. The same face that killed his love interest's best friend from the first game, the face of the man that killed Mizuki's parents, and almost succeeded in killing Hitomi, Iris, Mizuki, Ota, and Moma. That is beyond stupid, and I hate that this is just an accepted fact, because obviously, if the game showed Date in his proper body, that of Falco, that would be a pretty big, unavoidable spoiler in regards to the first game. I don't want to call it character assassination, because aside from this insane choice, Date is just as great as always. His pervy humor actually works a lot better when he's not the central character, how he's utilized in the story is for the most part pretty interesting, and his relationship with Ryuki is pretty compelling. I've made my point. The only thing I have left to mention is I wasn't a huge fan of how one of the main plot twists was revealed. That being said, I really can't think of many other ways the story could have gone about tackling it due to the nature of the twist and how it affects the story, so I'm not necessarily going to mark nirvanA Initiative down for that, and really it didn't hamper much of my overall enjoyment of the game, but I did still want to mention it briefly. At least the info dump sections were handled in a much more natural way than the first game for the most part, although they weren't a huge deal for me even in the first game. So, to wrap things up for the story section of this review, with AI the Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative, you have a story that manages to successfully expand upon the original in new and interesting ways with a story that's ambitious, mysterious, and exciting to witness. My issues with the returning characters and the events of the first game being tiptoed around aside, you have an insane and complex sci-fi murder mystery that genuinely took me by surprise at every big reveal or answer. No twist feels unearned or cheap though, and I am definitely looking forward to the future day where I replay this game and see all the clever hints and misdirection the game threw my way to make the story as stand out as possible. In this story, you have two new, unique main characters who develop in really interesting ways, and the characters they investigate, learn more about, or form bonds with all have great writing and impact on the story as well. The stakes and scope of the world are satisfyingly expanded without feeling like it goes too far at any point, and the big final act of this story was fantastic to experience. It's a very different vibe from the finale of the first game, but it feels like a finale that's a culmination of all things AI the Somnium Files. A love letter to both the original story and its fans that still manages to take the story and characters to new and exciting destinations. I may have spent a while nitpicking how this game handles the events of the first one, but that's mostly because I find it easier at times to rant about things I didn't like rather than things I did. Guess I'm a pessimist. I had a wonderful time with AI the Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative, and if you like the first one or love sci-fi and murder mystery, then I think you'll definitely find a lot to love in this unique and captivating story. Let's talk about the gameplay.
Step and gum on my way to the station. The crowd squeezes out my frustration, and now I'm taking heat in the classroom. Oh well, I'll eat some donuts in the bathroom.
nirvanA Initiative has 4 core styles of gameplay, though to be fair, 2 of them are pretty similar. First up you have the point and click sections. Like in my video on the first game, there's not much to say about this gameplay section. You look around your environment, click on things of interest to progress the story, and hear the dialogue between whatever main character you're playing as, their AI ball partner, and whatever characters are present in the scene. Much like the first game, it's easy and functional. What more could you ask for? Next up are these virtual reality investigation segments. Essentially, these are virtual reality recreations of important crime scenes that either Mizuki or Ryuki can access thanks to Aiba and Tama. In these, you move around as your designated main character and interact with the crime scene in order to try and find out the truth behind these bizarre murders. I really enjoyed these. While I wouldn't say they're the most groundbreaking from a gameplay perspective, it's walking around and clicking on things some more. I think it's a nice way to break up the pace of the usual point and click sections without having to go all the way in for a sync. And you do little recreations of the murderer or suspect interacting with a crime scene with either Mizuki or Ryuki playing said suspect, and those are always really entertaining to watch. It contains some of the more bizarre and comedic writing outside of the Somniums, but it works and it's fun. Up next is the QuickTime events, which I criticized kinda harshly in the video about the first game. To summarize, I thought the QuickTime events from the first game had great potential, but were bogged down and felt slow-paced due to a variety of issues. I was honestly expecting that to be the same with this entry, but surprisingly, the QuickTime events in this game are awesome. All the different characters with their different weapons or skill sets are utilized in exciting and interesting ways to make every fight scene really stand out. The set locations for the fights are varied and also play a factor in some of the fights. Overall, they're an exciting and welcome addition to nirvanA Initiative's unique story. Obviously, they're not the most high quality or logical of action scenes, especially with how janky the character animation and physics can still be, but I still had a blast with them. Lastly, the main draw of the game, gameplay-wise. The Somnium stages, where you explore the world of people's dreams to try and figure out what they're hiding. Like the first game, you have a great variety of vastly different Somnium stages that all wonderfully reflect the mindset or personality of who Mizuki or Ryuki is syncing with. I already loved the Somnium stages from the first game, and these are even better somehow. They get much more insane and outlandish in the best possible ways. After all, dreams themselves can be quite wild experiences. But even when I'm in a sci-fi laboratory combining two different halves of people to be able to drive better, or taking part in a shonen-style food cook-off battle, or doing anything else in these crazy and wacky Somnium worlds, they do all very much relate to and represent whatever you're trying to learn about the character your main character is syncing with. And I don't think the game ever goes too far with its absurdity that I lose tension or interest. This unique way of investigation, and sprinkling in hints and foreshadowing to the mystery at play are fantastic, and luckily, nirvanA Initiative has a lot of them this time around. While there are more of them than the first game, a lot of these do end up being linear with no branching story routes depending on your choices. The first game had those too, and what matters most is that the Somnium stages are memorable and enjoyable experiences, which they were. And in my video on the first game, I mentioned how sometimes it felt like what you were supposed to do could be a little unclear, resulting in some minor frustration at times when I had to redo Somniums because of the vague nature of some of them. And when I saw how much more ambitious and insane these Somniums were, I was sure that was going to be the case again. But no, for the most part, I had a clear idea of what I was supposed to do to progress through the Somniums and successfully break through the subject's mental locks in this game. There were still a couple times where I felt lost, but those were few and far between. Actually, this game kind of has the opposite problem than the first. Sometimes I feel like this game makes it too obvious or all but explains to you exactly what to do next. I feel like there is a balance somewhere, and once we hit that, these Somnium stages will be at their peak. But even with the hand-holding aside, these Somnium stages were insanely fun and interesting to explore. From being creeped out because of psychological horror, to playing what I assume to be a Pokemon knockoff to advance, to participating in a game show, the Somnium stages are once again a highlight for this game, and remain a compelling and exciting way to slowly unravel the mysteries of this story.
Ryuki!
That's...
I'm sorry. I didn't think this would happen.
It's gonna solve everything. Everything.
Blood.
Let's talk about the artwork and other aspects to this game. As always, I am far from qualified to talk about what makes artwork good, but I think the artwork of AI the Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative is great. Really appealing character designs that match the characters' personalities. I especially like the designs for some of the returning characters during the parts of the story set in the present, detailed and high quality background art for the point and click sections, and pretty good looking cutscenes. The character animations and facial expressions still have some of the jankiness from the first game, especially during the quick-time action scenes, but overall I do think it's an improvement from the first game. I was able to get really invested in all the big story moments that play out via cutscenes without feeling taken out of them because of awkward animations or movements. And that's good enough for me. The Somniums especially have such intricate and unique designs for the dream worlds you explore. Overall, the presentation for this game is a step up and matches the ambition of this game's elevated story, especially in the Somnium stages. This soundtrack to nirvanA Initiative is also fantastic. The reused tracks from the first game were mostly utilized well, and all the new tracks further add to whatever emotional reaction the scenes they're playing over were going for. While I would say I remember more of the soundtrack from the first game, I think the big standout tracks from this game overshadow those of the first. One of the Somnium tracks, Novel Ingress, blew me away when I first heard it. It really captured the heart and mind of the character you were syncing with at the time, and it's really just a beautiful track. I can't describe what makes music good, but dang it if the guitars in that track aren't good. Almost sounds like an early 2000s rock song, and I mean that as a compliment. So yeah, You have a great variety of music tracks that fit with the setting and ever-shifting tone of nirvanA Initiative's story. Since I'm kind of lackluster at describing or analyzing music, and artwork for that matter, here's a quick showcase of some of the great tracks this game has to offer. And now to talk about something that I can't believe I forgot to in the video about the first game, the voice acting. To briefly recap my thoughts on the voice acting from the first game, I thought it was fantastic. All the voice actors really nailed their characters and brought every line of dialogue, whether they be serious, emotional, or comedic, to life wonderfully. I genuinely can't think of any character who sounded off. And not that anyone was asking, but my personal favorite performance from the first game was Erika Harlacher. Her performance as Aiba was endearing and hilarious. And when it was time for Aiba's more serious moments in the story, she did great. She's one of my favorite voice actresses, with other fantastic performances of her being Violet from Violet Evergarden,
My name is Violet Evergarden.
and Shinobu from Demon Slayer.
It's you trying to stop me. But don't forget there's someone else to watch out for.
The rest of the voice cast, both for the first game and nirvanA Initiative, really brought their A-game.
Ace! You bet!
All the returning characters do a great job reprising their roles, even with most of their lackluster writing. Aiba is once again a delight thanks to Erika Harlacher, and the new cast all did a great job as well. All the new voice actors fit their roles extremely well and nail all the intended motions of the lines they go through. These two aren't like the most standout performances, but I especially found myself in love with Laura Post's performance as Tokiko and Kaji Tane's performance as Moma. I don't know why, but my mind keeps going back to these two a lot, so I figured I would mention them here, but everyone did a great job. The sound design of the game is also really well handled. The complex setting and mystery story unfolding is given even more weight thanks to the fitting sound design. The sound effects never feel over the top or obnoxious, and in both the QuickTime events and Somnium stages, they especially can be used in really fun and entertaining ways. That's all I really have to say on that. The UI of the game, much like the first, fits the sci-fi heavy setting of the game by having everything look all futuristic and techy. Not in an obvious or overbearing way, but in a way that matches the setting of the story and the sci-fi concepts explored. The flowchart is once again a godsend and something crucial to the story, as I can't imagine how difficult trying to keep track of all the events of the two different time periods in the game would have been without it. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about nirvanA Initiative. Let's start wrapping things up.
Is it some kind of planning sheet? It says nirvanA Initiative.
The nirvanA Initiative.
No good. There's too much blacked out.
Come on, isn't there anything else?
Ryuki, we're almost out of time.
Wait, try reading more of it.
Pewter, please.
AI The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative offers an ambitious, albeit slightly flawed story that kept me captivated and intrigued the whole time. Gameplay segments that improve the already great ones from the original while adding in some cool new features, and high production values that help give this game maximum impact. I try to be objective when I rate these games and visual novels on my channel, but I am about to let my personal bias get in the way of the score a little bit. I think the stories of both the first game and nirvanA Initiative are equally great, just for very different reasons. But nirvanA Initiative's story took everything I loved from the first game, built upon and expanded them in great ways, minus the game's aversion to discussing the events of the first game, and took this series and characters in a bold new direction, in regards to the scope of the story and sci-fi concepts explored in it. And on top of that, the gameplay for the most part is better than the first one. especially for the Somniums, which have a lot more depth and nuance to them both story-wise and gameplay-wise. Add to all that production values that are either equal to or greater than the first game, and how can I not like this one more than the first? So I rate AI The Somnium Files, nirvanA Initiative an 8 out of 10. If you like the first one, or you like Kotaro Uchikoshi's sharp and intricate style of writing, or you just like sci-fi and murder mystery stuff, you're gonna have a great time with this game. And hopefully I'll one day be able to recommend a third AI Somnium Files game to you guys. I really want to see what Kotaro Uchikoshi can do with this story and set of characters next, and I think it'd be cool to have this series of games be a trilogy. I'm fine with there being more than 3 games so long as the quality remains consistent, but I think having the AI Somnium Files series be a proper trilogy would be pretty neat. One of the various endings for this game has some pretty wild implications for the setting or world that these games are set in, and I'd be really interested to see if a future third game would address what was discussed in that ending and build upon it with the story focusing on said things, or if it's just something we're supposed to keep in the back of our minds as we go through the next new story. After all, who knows if it's even canon? Canon for me is always a tricky word when dealing with games with multiple different timelines and endings like the AI games do, so maybe it's a moot point. It would be cool to see what was discussed and tackled in that ending addressed further, but if it's not, it definitely still left an impression in my mind that I won't be forgetting about anytime soon. And when a story can keep you thinking about it, even long after it's over, I think that's the mark of a good story. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I did an adequate job at explaining why I enjoyed AI The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative and why you should try it if you haven't played it yourself. If you have, please tell me what you thought of the game and my review in the comments down below. And specifically, I really want to know, was anyone else bothered as much as me about how nirvanA Initiative so desperately avoided talking about the events of the first game? Like, I know I ranted about it for a bit, so I'm curious if that's a common complaint or if I'm hyper-focusing on something that I shouldn't. So please comment down below with your thoughts on the matter or anything else you think about the game or my review on it. And thank you to Prof.Geaver for editing this video, and he has quite the array of content including a lengthy video series on AI The Somnium Files. And if you want to see more content from me in the future, primarily being visual novel reviews and other anime related content, please consider subscribing to my channel and checking out some of my other videos. Thank you to everyone for watching, and remember,
Truth is only an illusion. Truth is only an illusion. Truth is only an illusion.
Death and gum on my way to the station. The crowd squeezes out my frustration. And now I'm taking heat in the classroom. Oh well, I'll eat some donuts in the bathroom. Now I hear my friend got herself a boyfriend. They're going out for barbecue on the weekend. I see all of their smiles in their pics online. Wait, why is that making me cry? Oh my Prince Charming, where can I find you? How do I remind you of the dream we share? But dreams are just for dreamers, lonely hearts and schemers. I've got to break the chains of fame on my own. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Lonely girls across the world, let's wake up and fight. Worlds apart with beating hearts, unite the light through the night. If the boys want to reach us, they'll have to keep up. Without you, I am lonely. I need to be whole.
Why are you surprised? I didn't lie. Let me show you the real world. I am this space.